Hello everyone, this is Ramirez with Tidewater Renaissance Fighting Arts. This weekend, fun fact, I'm dealing with a shoulder impingement, so no fighting for me today or this weekend. But I am working on it, working some physical therapy exercises, so I hope to be right back at it next week. Uh, Today, on a couple of different websites over the past week, I've been showing a new helmet I have. I will be showing it in this video a little bit later. But because of that and some of the comments that came up, I wanted to talk a little bit about helmets for Harnischfechten. And I want to be clear that there are bad helms, just overall costume grade helms. Then there are helmets that are meant for certain sports. So whether or not the combat sport is like SCA or several of the other offshoots of the SCA, they do rattan stick fighting. There is Buhurt, and there are helmets that are designed for that are fine for what they're for. So things like the wolf rib or the grill bar type helmets are fine for those sports, but they're actually really bad for Harnischfechten. Harnischfechten takes some pretty heavy historical styles in fighting a person and their armor, which means there's a lot of stabbing involved. And so a helmet has to protect you from that. Because of that, your oculars, and I think we need to talk a little bit about some technical terms just so that you understand. Oculars are eye slots in a helmet, need to be of a certain size to be safe, and there are other workarounds to help make them safe. And I think that's part of what we need to talk about. The other part we need to kind of talk about when we're looking at helmets is the gauge or thickness of the steel. And the only thing I want to say about that is generally on the lowest end, you're looking at 16 gauge steel. 14 is pretty universal. 12 is probably a little heavy, but still in the range. My bassinet is 12 just because heavier, and I've talked about this in other helmet reviews. Mass times acceleration. The heavier your helmet is, less it accelerates when something hits it, and that's good if you have neck issues, things like that, or where you just don't want to get hit so hard that your head spins around. But when we're talking about those gauges, that's the metal that the smith starts with, and then they start banging it around and shaping it. So when you get, let's say, a 16 gauge helmet, parts of it are going to be thinner than that because that's the metal the thickness they started out with before they started shaping it. It's not like you get a helmet that's finished and then they go with calipers and measure it and say, okay, it's 14 gauge all the way around. It probably isn't. Some helmets have metal that overlaps, which is good, but you should keep in mind that when you're getting something like that. Certainly anything less than 16 gauge, so if you get 18 or 19, and you'll see helmets out there, that's generally LARP or costume grade, something where they're not really expecting to take really, really heavy hits. So one of the first things you should look at is obviously the gauge of the metal. And type of metal varies, so you have mild steel, you have hardened steel, you have stainless steel. Generally, most of these are going to work. I would preface all of what I'm saying on the fact that you should really talk with the group of people you're going to be doing Harnischfechten with. That can vary from the types of events you're going to. Will have rules that they go by. If you are doing the SCA Harnischfechten experiment, they have a set of rules they base everything off of. Most places will use the Dekoven Accords, or I believe there's another group that does blow by blow. I haven't actually done that set of rules. I want to say that's the Lynx Accords. But there are other accords. There's one in Australia that they have their own set of rules. So it's important, or even if you're doing this with a private club, they may have their own rules. Certainly at TRFA, we have rules that dictate what is safe and what's not, largely based on the Dekoven Accords, but with some different leeway. So once again, you want to check if you're doing this and you plan to go to events, if you plan to play with other groups, it's good to know what rules are around. and to actually be on the conservative side of those rules. There are groups that do largely historical, and they might, for the sake of historic authenticity, they might have a little bit of leeway within the rules. So sometimes that'll depend, and you want to give that consideration as well. But we do use things that we stab with. This is on the most extreme end, this is a rondel dagger from Darkwood Armory. I do have a blunt on it, but underneath that is a very small rolled tip. Some of our stuff, we use wooden wasters and other things like that. So there's a rondel that's a wooden waster. You'll notice it has this bulbous end because ultimately the goal is to stab into parts like your armpit, the eyes. And when it comes to helmets, eyes are usually the pretty big weak spot. As long as your metal gauge is correct, most of them will protect you from solid blows, assuming they are padded correctly. And I will try to get into that a little bit later. But one way around this is what we call pierced plate. So once again, this is pierced plate. It's for my bassinet. Think of this as a fencing mask mesh on steroids. I can see out of this perfectly. You get used to it like you'd wearing a fencing mask. The downside to pierced plate on a helmet is that if you have it like this, it doesn't count for anything. It assumes you have an open-faced helmet. But pierced plate, which I'll put that closer to the camera, you can see, can be put welded or riveted to the inside of the oculars. So that is the eye holes for a helmet, and that does help to make them safe. Some groups absolutely require that if your oculars are of a certain size, they must have pierced plate on the inside of your helmet. I'll start out with an example of a bassinet. This is my primary fighting helmet, and I apologize, I am having some shoulder issues. And you can see those are very, very thin oculars. These are about 1/4 of an inch, and they do pass the general rule that you can't pass a 1/2 inch by 1/4 inch bar through the eye slot. There are other holes throughout it that still meet that designation. I can, as I said, since this is a clap visor, that other visor I showed you goes on here. And you'll notice about the oculars, they protrude out. So you can see that kind of here. They're also slightly angled, so it's not like a straight line. They actually kind of slope downwards or upwards, depending how you want to look at it. All this is meant to deflect a hit that would come in. And that's very important because, just put this down and not knock everything over. On cheaper versions of this, you won't see it. It'll just be like a slit cut across, or it'll be very, very big oculars. And if those oculars are too big, then something like this could easily pierce through it. Now this can't pierce through that. This can't pierce through any of the helmets that I have. And sometimes we use steel rondels. Sometimes we use steel pointed spears. And normally they should have blunts on them like this, which make them a little bit wider so they specifically can't go through an ocular. But you always run a risk that, let's say if this rubber blunt was not in as good condition and no one had checked it, that the point could go through it. And if it does, you run a risk of actually going into your helmet. So pierced plate is kind of the way to prevent that from happening. And I want to show you another helmet that has the pierced plate. So if someone asks, well, what's it like to have a pierced plate helmet, that I can show you. So this is my Salé from Barina. If you've seen the post that I put up, I said generally this is pretty safe, and usually if I need to loan a helmet to someone, this is the helmet that I will loan them. The slit here is just about just under a third. It's slightly over a 1/4 inch on that slit. I'm trying to find a way to hold this that you could see it. But if I try to stab the eye slot, it's not going in there. And even if an accident happened, I need to open this up. So this one has pierce plate. So on the inside, you can't get to the eyes because it has the pierce plate on the inside. And you can actually fight and choose to wear it without the visor down because that pierce plate protects the eyes and you don't have that opening. Now, some people do like this design, some people don't. I'm not here to argue that. I'm here to point out that some places do require absolutely pierce plate be used. Some do not, but generally those that do not have rules about the oculars that they're supposed to be about a 1/4 inch, or that you can't pass a 1/4 inch by a 1/2 inch bar through the oculars. Some places will be a little bit, I said, will have a little bit of leeway on that. But what you want also with your oculars is that they have some sort of sloped protection. Salets tend to have a little bit of a bridge, so if a shot comes upwards, it goes over. And the same thing when it comes down, and I'll show you this on another helmet in a moment, but, and I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, there is an angle here that comes up. So if something you're trying to stab here, it skips over that. When you're coming down, there's one that kind of slopes downward and out to kind of stop shots from coming in. That if one comes like close to here, that it rides up into the rest of the helmet. Cheap helmets, they tend not to take that, or they don't do a good job of it. So when you're looking at helmets and you're saying, oh, well, this is cheap, it's online, I found it, you may find that you have oculars that are just literally just straight flat cut-ins, and if a blade came in, it would just go right in and right into your eye. So you want to be really careful about selecting helmets like that. Obviously anything that has a wolf rib or a bar grill that you kind of see out of was meant for something where either A, like in Boohurt, you can get hit all the time. They don't allow stabbing, so it doesn't really matter. That's the same problem you'll have with some Griffin, the Griffin style helmets. They have fairly thin eye slots, but they're flat. They don't have anything protruding out to stop a strike from coming in. And if those eye slots exceed that 1/4 inch, you run a risk of that placing perfectly and going in. And unlike other sports like Boohurt where stabbing isn't allowed, stabbing into the eye slots is not only allowed in most cases in Harnischfechten, it's encouraged. Because if I can do this, and obviously it won't go through, but if it's on the ocular, that's considered a kill. That's a victory condition. So people will attempt to stab you in the eye. That's part of the game. So obviously you want armor that and helmets that particularly well protect your eyes. So you might look at a helmet and say, hey, I have this one, or a friend's going to sell me this one from Boohurt or the SCA, and you may want to just check, because if it's that type of helmet, it's really not going to work. Now I'm going to briefly pause this video so I can get you one more helmet. So this is a beautiful helmet done by GS Armory. It is a one that's similar to the Lawrence Helmschmied Salet. It is a closed helm bassinet, closed helm salet, which means that this visor can be raised. You'll notice there's no pierced plate here. For a historical group, this would be really, really great. But you'll notice that vision slot. In a perfect world, I would have pierced plate in here. This is about 1/3 of an inch. I have tested it, and this is where, as I said, that kind of gray area. If I were to take a dagger, I can't get a dagger into that slot. But if that rubber had broken, that rubber tip on a wooden one, once again, it's not really an issue. I can not get that in there. And most of our weapons, the Helgi, poleaxe heads, etc., they'd be fine with something this width. And if I was doing a largely historical event, that may not be a big issue. So it's something to kind of keep in mind. That you can have helmets that are a little bit more historical, that do have a little bit wider, but I would never really go with anything with an ocular of a 1/2 inch or more. This is about 1/3 of an inch, and even that's probably, if I went to some events, they'd be like, hey, Ramirez, do you have a different helmet you could wear? But if I knew, and most of the deed of arms that I've gone to, they'll accommodate for you to a degree. There are some people who wear salets and bevers that are 2-piece. And while that is potentially a safety issue, they're like, does it lock, or how do you get secured a certain way? And they go slower in their style of fighting. It may not be as aggressive as what you might see in Bucher, you might see in the SCA, because they're aware there are limitations in the armor. And generally, I think one of the rules all fighting should have is, don't be a jerk when it comes to fighting other people. But some places might not. An organization with big insurance, somewhere like the SCA, if they're doing a Harnischfechten, they're doing it experimentally, they might look at a helmet like that and say, absolutely not. If it doesn't have pierced plate, that ocular is too big, we can't allow you to use it. So it's important to know which group you're working with, what are their requirements, and I would encourage you, if you're looking for a helmet for Harnischfechten, that you talk with people in your local group, maybe get some advice from them about what types of helmets to get before going out and buying one. And I think that's a good rule with armor overall. I have a few minutes left, so I just want to briefly talk about padding. Many helmets, the one you just saw and the Barina, both the Salets, were unpadded when I got them, and I did a padding. I have a video for padding helmets. The Bassinet is from Arm Street, and they do a more historical liner. Of the two styles, I personally really like the historical liner. I may get another helmet from Arm Street just because I really like the way they do their liners, and they fit comfortably. I've been thrown wearing my Bassinet at this point twice, and every time I've landed, it's been like, I'm in a pillow, like it's just a big pillow around your head, and it isn't as harsh as it would be with some of the military pads that you can use and that I use on the Salets in an unpadded thing. I always bring this up because I did see a video that was put out, I'm not going to link it or anything, where someone was like, yeah, you can just wear an arming cap and put an unpadded helmet on your head and you're kind of good to go. And that is 100% not true. Never, ever, ever do that. Helmets especially are designed to have some type of padding in them. Even if it's like, if it was a kettle hat, which you wouldn't use for harness, it would have some sort of liner in it with some sort of padding to put on your head, so your head wouldn't rest on the metal. You should never have that. An arming cap, even a padded arming cap, is never sufficient for padding with a helmet. So with that said, I am going to leave you. Once again, this is Ramirez with Tidewater Renaissance Fighting Arts. We're based out of Norfolk, Virginia. And I'll see you in the next video. But if you do have any questions, comments, please leave them below, and I will try to get to them and answer them. And if they warrant it, I'll even create a video for you. All right, take care.